In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, honorable audience, it gives me great pleasure to congratulate His Excellency Mr. Miroslav Lajčák on assuming the presidency of the 72nd session of the General Assembly, wishing him every success in his mission. I wish also to express my appreciation to His Excellency Mr. Peter Thomson for his valuable efforts in managing the affairs of the 71st session of the General Assembly. I take this opportunity to commend the efforts of His Excellency the Secretary-General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, to strengthen the role of the United Nations. Mr. President, maintaining the regional and international peace and security is a priority in the state of Qatar's foreign policy, whose principles and purposes are based on the United Nations Charter and the rules of international legitimacy, which calls for constructive cooperation among states, mutual respect and non-interference in the internal affairs, as well as good neighborliness, and promoting peaceful coexistence while pursuing peaceful means to settle disputes. The issue of settling disputes by peaceful means is still being addressed as an episodic and non-binding proposal. Perhaps the time has come to impose dialogue and negotiation as a basis for resolving disputes through concluding an international convention on settling disputes between states by peaceful means. In this context, and after major events such as World War II, Rwanda and Burundi and the Balkans over the last century, the danger of the impunity of perpetrators of crimes against humanity and crimes of genocide has come back again to threaten humanity. It has become the rule and not an exception, because the international legitimacy is subjected to political leverage, to the interests of the Axis and the dictations of the force on the ground, which pretends that the law of force may supersede the force of law. In our view, the major powers should not adopt one of two extreme positions, either the direct occupation of countries to impose their will and policy, or standing idly and turning a blind eye to wars of genocide and crimes against humanity perpetrated by fascist despotic regime, or ignoring the continuous repression of people under occupation by the occupying state. Lately, there is a growing sense that people under repression are facing their fate alone, as if the international arena is governed by the law of jungle, as if the countries under threat have to stand on their own, relying on their alliances and relations in the absence of a system to implement the provisions of international law and the binding conventions and charters. Mr. President, we commend the theme of this session, focusing on people striving for peace and a decent life for all on a sustainable planet. In this context, I call upon the government of the Republic of the Union of Myanmar and the international community to assume their legal and moral responsibility and take the necessary measures to stop the violence against the Rohingya minority, providing them with protection and repatriating the displaced to their homeland, preventing sectarian or ethnic discrimination against this minority and ensuring that they have their full legitimate rights as full-fledged citizens. We urge all states to provide humanitarian assistance to the Rohingya. Mr. President, every time I stand here, I speak in favor of constructive international cooperation, just peace, the rights of people under occupation, as well as those who are subjected to crimes against humanity or those under siege. This time, I stand before you, while my country and my people are subjected to a continuing and unjust blockade imposed since June the 5th by the neighboring countries. The blockade involves all aspects of life, including severing family ties. Qatar is currently managing successfully its livelihood, economy, development plans and its outreach to the outside world thanks to sea and air routes that are not under the control of these countries. The blockade was imposed abruptly and without warning, prompting Qataris to consider it a kind of betrayal. It seems that those who have planned and implemented it had envisaged that their move would cause a shocking and direct impact that will bring the state of Qatar to its knees and to capitulate to a total guardianship imposed upon it. And what is worse, the blockade schemers found it necessary to rely on fabricated quotes attributed to me, which they posted on the website of Qatar news agency after hacking it. The controlled media of these countries was ready to launch an all-out campaign of incitement prepared in advance, in which all values, morals and norms were breached. And the truth was infringed upon by a torrent of lies. Funds are still being spent unsparingly on the machine, faking and disseminating fabrications in the hope of fooling people by distorting the truth with mere lies. Despite the exposure of the hacking and falsification of quotes of the Emir of a sovereign state, the blockading countries did not back down or apologize for lying, but rather intensified their campaign in the hope that the blockade would cause a cumulative effect on the economy and the society of my country after it failed to bring about any direct impact. The perpetrators of the hacking and the falsification of the quotes have committed an assault against a sovereign state. The crime was deliberately committed for political aims and was followed by a list of political dictations which prejudiced sovereignty. They caused worldwide astonishment. This disgraceful act has once again raised international queries about digital security and the unruliness in cybercrime and electronic piracy. It also revealed the anxiety of a lot of public and official circles in the world over the absence of clear-cut international legislations and institutions that govern this dangerous and vital field or punish the perpetrators of transnational crimes. It is high time to take steps in this vein. We are ready to mobilize our potentials to serve such joint effort. The countries who imposed the unjust blockade on Qatar have intervened in the internal affairs of the state by bringing pressure to bear on the citizens through foodstuff, medicine, cutting family ties, to force them to change their political affiliation, thus destabilizing a sovereign country. Isn't this one of the definitions of terrorism? This illegal blockade was not confined to the economic aspect or the breach of the WTO agreement. But it went beyond that. It violated human rights conventions by the arbitrary measures that have caused socio-economic harms and religious harm to thousands of citizens and residents of the GCC countries. They violated basic human rights to work, get education or the freedom of movement and the right to dispose of private property. Things did not stop at this point. The blockading countries went beyond that to persecute their own citizens and residents of their territory and imposing penalties of imprisonment and fines on them for the mere expression of their sympathy with Qatar, even if that was on the social media, in a precedent never seen by the world, in violation of the human rights conventions and agreements that guarantee the right to freedom of opinion and expression. There are some countries that permit to themselves not only to attack a neighboring country to dictate their own foreign policy and policy undertaken in the media, but also believe that their possession of funds qualify them to put pressure and blackmail other countries to participate in their aggression, while they are supposed to be held accountable internationally for what they have committed. The countries who have imposed the blockade on on the state of Qatar interfere in the internal affairs of many countries and accuse all those who oppose them domestically or abroad with terrorism. Thus, they are inflicting damage on the war on terror, while at the same time opposing reform and supporting the tyrannical regimes in our region, the prisons of which harbor terrorists. We were not alone to be taken by surprise by the imposition of the blockade, as many countries' leaders have also questioned its motives and reasons. The blockading countries have promised all those who asked about the reasons of the blockade to provide evidence of their anti-Qatar absurd allegations and fabrications, which kept changing according to the identity of the addressee. Everyone is still awaiting an evidence that never materialized because it does not exist. In contrast, these allegations contradict a lot of evidence about Qatar's contribution to the fight against terrorism, which is recognized by the entire international community. The state of Qatar has fought terrorism. The whole international community bears witness to that, and it is still fighting it and will continue to do that. It stands in the camp of those who are fighting by security means. Qatar believes that it is necessary to fight it ideologically. It goes beyond that to participate in draining its sources through providing education to 7 million children around the world so that they do not fall prey to ignorance and radical ideas. We have refused to yield to dictations by pressure and siege, and our people will accept nothing less. At the same time, we have taken an open attitude towards dialogue without dictations, and we have expressed our readiness to resolve differences through compromises based on common undertakings. Resolving conflicts by peaceful means is actually one of the priorities of our foreign policy. From this podium, we renew the call for an unconditional dialogue based on mutual respect for sovereignty. And I highly value the sincere and appreciated mediation that the state of Qatar has supported since the start of the crisis, initiated by my brother, His Highness Sheikh Subah al-Ahmad al-Jaber al-Sabah, the Emir of the sisterly state of Kuwait. I also thank all those countries that have supported this mediation. Allow me on this occasion and from this podium to express my pride in my Qatari people, along with the multinational and multicultural residents of Qatar. The people have withstood the conditions of siege and rejected the dictations with resolve and pride. They insisted on the independence of Qatar's sovereign decision and strengthened its unity and solidarity, maintaining their refined manners and their progress despite the fierceness of the campaign launched against them and their country. I reiterate my thanks to the sisterly and friendly countries which recognize the significance of respecting the sovereignty of states and the rules of international law. We appreciate their positions which were and remain supportive of the Qatari people during this crisis. Mr. President, terrorism and extremism are among the most serious challenges facing the world. Countering them requires us all to carry out a concerted action against terrorist organizations and their extremist ideology in order to maintain security for humanity and stability for the world. The governments of the world have no choice but to cooperate in the security confrontation with terrorism. But halting the initiation of terrorism and extremism could be achieved by addressing its social, political and cultural root causes. We also must be careful not to make the fight against terrorism an umbrella for reprisals or shelling of civilians. The fight against terrorism and extremism was and will remain a top priority for Qatar. This is exemplified by the effective participation of the state of Qatar in regional and international efforts through the implementation of the measures included in the United Nations strategy adopted back in 2006, as well as the implementation of all Security Council resolutions and measures related to countering terrorism or financing it. We've also participated in international coalitions, regional organizations, and nurtured bilateral relations with the United States and many countries of the world to that vein. The state of Qatar will continue its regional and international efforts in this regard and will develop them. While reaffirming our condemnation of all forms of extremism and terrorism, we reject tackling this phenomenon with double standards according to the identity of the perpetrators, or linking it with any particular religion, race, civilization, culture, or society. Mr. President, the issues facing the Middle East continue to pose the greatest threat to international peace and security due to the vital importance of this region to the world. Israel still stands in the way of achieving a lasting, just and comprehensive peace and rejects the Arab Peace Initiative. The Israeli government continues its intransigent approach and strategy to create facts on the ground through expanding settlement construction in the occupied territories, Judaizing Jerusalem and restricting the performance of religious rituals in Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is a serious, provocative act. It also continues to impose its blockade on the Gaza Strip. The international community must give high priority to the resumption of peace negotiations on the basis of ending the Israeli occupation of the Arab territories within a specified time frame and reaching a just, comprehensive and vital settlement in accordance with the two-state solution agreed upon by the international community based on the resolutions of international legitimacy and the Arab Peace Initiative. This will only be achieved through the establishment of an independent Palestinian state on the basis of the 1967 borders with Jerusalem as its capital. I renew my appeal to the Palestinian brothers to complete national reconciliation and unify positions and words in confronting the dangers and challenges facing the Palestinian question and the future of the Palestinian people. Mr. President, the international community remains unable to find a solution to the Syrian crisis, despite its consequences and serious repercussions on the region and the world. Political efforts continue to falter due to the conflicting international and regional interests. This confliction is conducive to protect those against whom we're supposed to stand united. The international community relinquishes its legal and moral responsibilities, including the implementation of its decisions, in submission to the logic of force. What's required is to seriously work to reach a political solution to the Syrian crisis in a way that meets the aspirations of the Syrian people for justice, dignity and freedom, and maintain the unity and sovereignty of Syria in accordance with the Geneva I decisions. Qatar will spare no effort in providing support and assistance to alleviate the humanitarian suffering of our Syrian brothers and to implement our humanitarian pledges within the framework of the United Nations. The international community has given up the task of protecting civilians. Will it also hesitate to hold war criminals accountable? Their impunity would have dire consequences on the situation in Syria and the region, which would affect the behavior of future dictatorships towards their peoples in the absence of any deterrent. Turning to the Libyan question, Libya's national consensus, which would preserve Libya's unity, sovereignty and social fabric and restore its stability, could be achieved by means of combining domestic and international effort. We must all intensify efforts and support the Government of National Accord, which has been established with the support of the United Nations, in its effort to restore stability, counter terrorism, and its grave consequences. The state of Qatar has supported international mediation efforts and will support them in the future to meet the aspirations of the Libyan people. Concerning the brotherly country Iraq, we support the efforts of the Iraqi government in its endeavor to achieve security, stability and unity of the territory and people of Iraq. We commend the achievements of these people in their fight against terrorism. We affirm our necessary support to complement their victories by realizing the aspirations of the people of Iraq to equality among all citizens and restore its role at the regional and international levels. Concerning Yemen, we affirm the importance of maintaining Yemen's unity, security and stability, and ending the state of infighting and war while adopting dialogue, political solution and national reconciliation as a basis for ending this crisis and implementing Security Council Resolution 2216. We call upon the international community to facilitate the access of humanitarian assistance to various Yemeni regions. The state of Qatar supports the efforts of the UN envoy to end this crisis and realize the aspirations of the brotherly Yemeni people in unity, security and stability. In order to achieve security and stability in the Gulf region, we renew our call that has already been launched from this podium for conducting a constructive dialogue between the GCC countries and Iran on the basis of common interests, the principle of good neighborliness, respect for state sovereignty, and the non-interference in the internal affairs of other states. Mr. President, within the framework of the international efforts to face up the humanitarian crisis, the state of Qatar has continued to contribute in the international response to the growing humanitarian needs in the world at large. We have increased our financial contributions to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the OCHA, to enable the United Nations to implement UN programs and provide humanitarian relief to those in need worldwide. Today, the state of Qatar ranks third on the list of major donors in the year 2017 to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. We have continued to provide support to countries facing challenges to help them implement their development plans. It's worth mentioning here that the state of Qatar ranked first in the Arab world and 33rd in the world in the field of human development. This proves the effectiveness of our humanitarian and development policy. We look forward to achieving the goals of the United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda, which we have all committed to achieve. In conclusion, we reiterate that the state of Qatar will spare no effort in strengthening the role and effort of the United Nations to achieve what the international community seeks, bringing in peace and security and promoting human rights and advancing development. Qatar will remain, as is always the case, a safe haven for the oppressed, and we will continue its mediation efforts to find just solutions in conflict zones. Thank you, and may Allah's peace, mercy and blessings be upon you.